the 7th of October, is simply the trigger event of the third act of the settler colonial project.
You've written a really evocative piece about the power of narratives. Now, you write in that article that one of the last acts in managing an indigenous people who are being replaced by a settler colony is to pen them up in a reservation or concentration camp. So in a way, you're positing, you're placing what we're seeing in Gaza within a historical precedent. Please tell me about this.
Well, if you imagine what happened in the great United States of America, where the indigenous people fought their settler colonialists for centuries, and the final process of actually managing them when they had been defeated was to round them up and put them into reservations. And these reservations were completely controlled by the jailers, by the conquerors. What went in, what went out, what they could do. If they came off the reservation, they were in trouble. And they were basically kept in a kind of cold storage, just alive, because that was the end of the process. And this has been used since then, because this was in the mid-late 19th century. It was going on in America. But it was then used in the Boer War, because the British were having terrible trouble actually dealing with the Boers. So they broke the country up into regions, and then they literally, like cattle, they brought the people into these barbed wire reservations.
Beginning of the 20th century.
That was
South
sort of
Africa.
it was the end of the 19th century. And it was a terrible thing. I mean, there was a terrible starvation. Children died, women died, families were destroyed. And then there was Libya, where it was used to great effect, because again, the Italians in their attempt to recreate their Roman Empire and take over Libya as a part of their world, they had a tremendously difficult time in quelling the resistance. So they introduced this process, because once you've put the people into an area which you can control, you can gradually limit their movement little by little. Gaza is just another example of this. The Gazans are in since 2007. They've been in a space which has been completely controlled from air, from sea, from land, and nothing goes in or out. They are totally under the control of the occupier. So this is a horrible process which becomes inevitable when a settler colony is having to deal with the final remnants, if you like, of the people that they are replacing. But of course, in the case of Palestine, too many Palestinians are far too such an amazing culture. So what we're seeing is something that has happened many times, but in this particular incident, we don't have words now any longer to describe it.
That's perfectly true. In your article, you talk about the final stage. Now, the people of Gaza have been penned into this concentration camp since 2007, yet you argue that on October the 7th, the opportunity was given to Israel to institute this final stage. What in your mind is this final stage?
Well, the final stage is basically either you ethnically cleanse and get rid of the people, or you subjugate them permanently, or you kill them. That's it. There's nothing else. And what to me is interesting is the way that settler colonialist cultures and colonial cultures have used, the mechanism they have used to enter that final gear. Because to enter that final process of total elimination, finality, it requires something tremendous. And I believe that the 7th of October was one of these moments, but is not in any way separate. It's not in any way something that is unusual. I want to give you 3 beautiful examples of events which triggered a huge explosion of cruelty and death. The first one I want to talk about is Custer's last stand. The moment when, towards the end of the great resistance of the Sioux Indians and the tribes, but the Sioux indigenous people of America, and they were in Montana, and they'd literally been in this last part, a place where they were able to live as they could live properly. And the treaty was there with the Americans for them to stay there. Yeah. But then gold was found. And of course, the gold diggers moved in, and the army moved in to break the treaty and to move them on. And they had a great warlord, a great leader in Chief Sitting Bull. He was a magnificent warrior and a very wise leader. And they came together, and the 7th Cavalry was sent under the command of Colonel Custer. And a battle ensued, and the Sioux won a great victory. and the whole of that 7th Troop was destroyed. The impact back in Washington was volcanic. This was a catastrophe. And it was not viewed, as Chief Sitting Bull said, when you win a battle, you call it a victory. When we win a battle, you call it a massacre. And of course, that's how it was reported. And Custer became an emblem of heroic chivalry. His statues went up all over America. His paintings of this last final stand when he nobly was standing there against all these savages. And the result was, of course, that a huge explosion to destroy the savages. And they sent the army and they rounded up and they went through that final process of destroying, crushing all resistance and placing the Sioux in the reservations. So this is an example where that event triggered this absolute slaughter and demonization of the... In the same process, over that 20 years, the final 20 years, they also destroyed the buffalo. Millions of buffalo. And by the end of 20 years, they were completely gone. They had simply been massacred along with the Indians. My second example is the Sudan and is General Gordon. And this is during the Mahdi War. And General Gordon in Khartoum is killed. Khartoum is overcome by the Mahdi's forces and he's killed in the battle that takes place. And this caused an absolute uproar in London. The newspapers went crazy. Parliament went crazy. This monster had destroyed the sainted Gordon, who was a Christian maniac and who literally became overnight the most famous man in Victorian England. And statues went up to him and pictures and paintings of him standing at the top of the steps being massacred. And of course, the forces that had destroyed him became completely demonized, and the big army was sent from Egypt down into the Sudan, and with their machine guns and everything, they destroyed the Sudanese resistance. Now, an amazing film was made just before the war when the empire mentality was completely intact. So the film shows you exactly how we were during that empire period. It's a film called The Four Feathers. It's about this man who has to regain his honor by going out and joining the forces which were going to Khartoum to revenge the death of General Gordon. And the British are such heroes. They are beautiful. You know, you feel proud to be a member of them. And the Arabs and the Sudanese, they are so cruel. The horrors that you are faced with. You're seeing these brutish people. So this is the second of my examples of a moment that triggered an explosion of finality. And the third, of course, is what was called by the British the Indian Mutiny of 1857, and which was by the Indians the Great Rebellion, and of course a great rebellion which followed many rebellions, but was the one that very nearly succeeded. And the event, and I was brought up with this because, as I told you in my last visit, that I was educated for empire.
Yeah. And
the Black Hole of Calcutta was the most powerful image I had as a child about India. And the Black Hole of Calcutta basically was when, I'll just read it here, because the Black Hole of Calcutta refers to a prison cell which was used to hold 146 mostly British prisoners captured after the Nawab of Bengal had taken over the city from the East India Company. Interred on 20th of June 1756 in a tiny cell in Fort William. 123 of the prisoners died of dehydration and suffocation. And this became the 7th of October.
Yeah.
This became the moment when the Indians turned into monsters, full monsters. And the reaction back from England was huge. And after the defeat of the rebellion, the most terrible bloodletting took place. And a great part of that bloodletting was directed at the Muslims. The last of the Mughal emperors in Delhi was deposed and sent to die in Burma. It's a terrible story. Yeah. And Delhi was decimated. The beautiful city of Delhi, a city of such scholarship, was destroyed. People were taken and tied onto the end of cannons and blown up. Wherever you went, they said that the trees had people hanging from them. The summary justice was being going on all over the place. And for the Muslims, it was a time when the knowledge world of Islam in India was decimated. Charles Dickens, who you would have imagined would have taken a sympathetic view, his letter, which he wrote, which I'll read now. I couldn't believe it because I'd always been a great lover of his work. But this was his reaction to 1857. I wish I were commander-in-chief over there in India. I would address that Oriental character which must be powerfully spoken to in something like the following, which should be vigorously translated in all native dialects. I, the inimitable, holding this office of mine, and firmly believing that I hold it by the permission of heaven, and not by the appointment of Satan, have the honour to inform you Hindu gentry that it is my intention, with all possible avoidance of unnecessary cruelty, and with all merciful swiftness of execution, to exterminate the race from the face of the earth, which disfigured the earth with the late abominable atrocities. 2,000 British killed in the 1857 Indian War of Independence. Only 2,000, compared to many, obviously, of the Indians. But that event, again, the Black Hole of Calcutta, was the trigger event. So as far as I'm concerned, the 7th of October is simply the trigger event of the third act of the settler colonial project.